Today, we're going to trace the origin of a technology that's so fundamental to who we are, it's kind of easy to forget it was ever invented in the first place. We're going on a search for the very first fire.
You know, every single time you turn on a light, start your car, or, even charge your phone, you are tapping into a chain of energy that began with a flickering flame controlled by one of our distant ancestors. And that one discovery, it didn't just give us warmth and light. It laid the foundation for, well, everything.
But actually pinning down that moment, that's one of the toughest puzzles in all of archaeology. So, the big questions are, when did our ancestors really truly tame fire? And, maybe more importantly, how did playing with that fire completely remake what it even means to be human?
Well, our journey with fire wasn't some single eureka moment. As the archaeologist J.A.J. Gowlett from the University of Liverpool points out, it was a really long, slow process. For millions of years, our ancestors would have seen natural fires, sparked by lightning. They probably learned to follow these fires, scavenging food in their wake, long before they ever dared to control one themselves.
Okay, so before we start digging into the evidence, we have to get our heads around the central problem for archaeologists. How in the world do you tell the difference between a random wildfire and an intentional campfire from 1,000,000 years ago? Well, a natural fire, it leaves behind widespread, kind of shallow charring. But a controlled fire, a hearth, it creates a totally different signature, a small, focused area of deep, repeated burning. And it's almost always found right next to stone tools and animal bones. So with that in mind, let's become archaeological detectives for a bit. We're going to travel to the key sites that hold the clues to this ancient mystery. And we're going to treat them like crime scenes, where every single speck of dust has a story to tell. The trail of evidence is a long one. For years, the earliest hints we had came from sites like Kubifora in Kenya, dating back about 1.5 million years. But these were just patches of red earth out in the open, so you could never really rule out a simple wildfire. We see much more convincing evidence of regular fire use pop up in Israel around 790,000 years ago. But the real breakthrough, the earliest secure evidence, that takes us to a cave in South Africa 1,000,000 years ago. This place is called Wonderwerk Cave. It's in South Africa's Northern Cape province. And it's not just one of humanity's oldest known homes. It also happens to hold the key to our entire story. All right, let's get into this because this is the crucial part. The evidence at Wonderwerk Cave wasn't found near the entrance, where a stray wildfire might have licked its way inside. Nope. It was discovered 30 meters deep inside the cave. That's almost 100 feet. Just way too deep to be an accident. So what exactly did they find in there? A team of researchers found microscopic traces of ashed plants and these tiny little fragments of burned bone. And what was so important is that the evidence showed that fires had been lit in this exact spot over and over and over again. The likely residents of the cave at the time? Our ancestor, Homo erectus. This was the smoking gun, the first widely accepted proof of fire control. Now, what's really fascinating is how they proved it. The science here is just incredible. Researchers like Francesco Berna and Paul Goldberg used a technique called micromorphology. What they do is they carefully cut out whole blocks of sediment, they preserve them in resin, and then they slice them paper thin. Under the microscope, they could see these delicate layers of ash and bone exactly as they were laid down 1,000,000 years ago. It was proof beyond a doubt. The fires were lit inside that cave. Finding fire 1,000,000 years ago is a huge discovery. But, it just opens up an even bigger question. What were our ancestors actually doing with it? And that leads us to one of the most powerful and, one of the most debated ideas in all of human evolution. This is a quote from Richard Wrangham. He's a primatologist at Harvard University. Back in 1999, he came up with this revolutionary idea to explain a huge leap in our evolutionary past, the emergence of our ancestor, Homo erectus. He called it the cooking hypothesis, and the core idea is pretty simple, but it is absolutely profound. He argued that the invention of cooking is what made us human. See, by using fire to cook their food, our ancestors were basically starting to digest their meals outside their bodies. This whole process unlocked a massive surplus of calories and nutrients that were just completely unavailable from raw foods. And this is where you can see this incredible domino effect. According to Wrangham, all that extra energy fueled a complete biological renovation. With softer cooked food, Homo erectus evolved its smaller teeth and jaws. Their guts shrank because digesting cooked food is just so much easier, and that freed up all this metabolic energy that could then be rerouted to growing larger bodies, and this is the big one, much larger energy-guzzling brains. Plus, fire meant warmth and protection, which finally allowed them to leave the trees and sleep safely on the ground.
So, the cooking hypothesis, it's an elegant, powerful explanation. But it's really important to remember that science thrives on debate. And this idea has some pretty compelling counter-arguments. While a lot of researchers agree it was important, the exact timing and the primary role of cooking are still very much under discussion in the scientific community.
So, the crucial point here is that there are other theories. For example, some researchers back what's called the meat-eating hypothesis. This suggests that it wasn't cooking, but simply the shift to eating more energy-rich raw meat that fueled the evolution of Homo erectus. In this view, all those anatomical changes we see are adaptations for processing and eating raw flesh, not for eating cooked plants. And the critics of the cooking hypothesis, they point to some really serious challenges. You can see them outlined here. The biggest one is a potential timeline mismatch. Homo erectus shows up in the fossil record around 1.8 million years ago, but that solid evidence for fire from Wonderwerk is 800,000 years later. On top of that, some data suggest our brain size was already on the rise before fire became common. And this is really fascinating. At least one study on mice found they got just as much, if not more energy, from raw meat versus cooked meat, which directly challenges one of the core ideas of the hypothesis.
But here's where things get really interesting. Because regardless of whether cooking sparked the evolution of Homo erectus or not, scientists pretty much all agree on what happened next. Once our ancestors mastered fire, it didn't just reshape our bodies. It rewired our brains, and it gave birth to society itself.
Think about it. The simple act of keeping a flame going triggered this social cascade. Fire meant safety from predators, but it also completely changed our daily rhythms. For the first time ever, our ancestors had usable hours after the sun went down. The campfire became the hearth, the first home base, a central spot for the group to gather, share food, and just find comfort. These new nighttime hours were a profound social invention, a space for connection, planning, and bonding.
This is where we learn to be us. As the anthropologist Polly Weisner from the University of Utah puts it, these fire-lit hours of the night became the world's first stage. This is where storytelling was born. The need to share information, to remember the day's hunt, to plan for tomorrow, to tell stories about the past. All of that probably put immense evolutionary pressure on us to develop complex language. The campfire was, in a very real way, the original social media.
So, 1 million years ago, deep inside a South African cave, our ancestors harnessed a power that would forge our bodies, our brains, and our societies. It fundamentally changed the entire human trajectory. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought. What's the fire of our time? What forces, visible or invisible, are forging and remaking us right now?